David had always been proud of his electronics store chain. What started as a small shop in his hometown had grown into 12 locations across 3 cities. For 15 years, he poured his heart into building something that would serve customers and provide good jobs for his community. But lately, something was wrong. Really wrong. The phone calls started coming in more frequently. Angry customers complaining about rude staff. Online reviews that made his stomach turn. Social media posts where people warned others to shop elsewhere. The numbers didn't lie either. Sales were dropping and customers weren't coming back like they used to. At his main store downtown, things had gotten especially bad. The place that was supposed to be his crown jewel had become his biggest headache. Every week brought new complaints about the staff there. People said they felt unwelcome, ignored, or treated like they were bothering the employees just by walking in. David tried everything he could think of. He held team meetings. He sent emails about customer service. He even brought in a consultant to train the staff on being more helpful and friendly. But nothing seemed to stick. The complaints kept coming, and the ratings kept falling. The worst part was that whenever David visited the store himself, everything seemed fine. The employees smiled, helped customers, and acted professional. It was like a completely different place from what the reviews described. This made him wonder what was really happening when he wasn't around. 3 employees at the downtown store had become particularly problematic, though David didn't know it yet. There was Lisa, who had worked her way up to assistant manager over 4 years. She had started as an eager, helpful employee, but success had gone to her head. Now she acted like customers were beneath her, especially if they asked questions she thought were obvious. Then there was Tony, a college student who worked part-time. He treated his job like it was just something to do between classes. Most of the time, he was more interested in his phone than helping anyone. When customers approached him, he would give them the shortest possible answers and try to get back to whatever he was doing. The third problem employee was Rachel, who ran the customer service desk. She had dealt with difficult customers for so long that she had become bitter and suspicious of everyone. In her mind, every customer was trying to cheat the store or waste her time. She made returning items or getting help feel like a battle. These 3 had created their own little world inside the store. They would spend their shifts complaining about customers, making fun of people who asked for help, and generally treating everyone who walked in like an inconvenience. Other employees started picking up on their attitude, and soon the whole atmosphere of the store had changed. Customers could feel it the moment they walked in. Instead of feeling welcome in a place where they were spending their money, they felt like they were interrupting something. The staff seemed annoyed when asked questions. Simple requests became complicated. People who should have been treated as valued customers felt more like unwanted visitors. Lisa had developed a particular talent for making people feel small. When someone asked where to find something, she would sigh loudly before pointing in a general direction. If they asked follow-up questions, she would act like they weren't listening the first time. Older customers especially seemed to annoy her, and she made no effort to hide her impatience when they needed extra help with technology. Tony's approach was different, but equally damaging. He had mastered the art of being technically helpful, while being completely unhelpful at the same time. He would answer questions with the absolute minimum information needed, never offering additional help or suggestions. If someone asked about a laptop, he might say they're over there, without explaining the differences between models or helping them find what they actually needed. Rachel at the customer service desk had turned what should have been a helpful resource into an obstacle course. She questioned every return, made people feel like they were lying about problems with products, and generally made the experience so unpleasant that many customers just gave up and left. Her attitude was that anyone coming to customer service was probably trying to get away with something. The 3 of them fed off each other's negativity. During slow periods, they would gather together and share stories about stupid customers, or complain about having to do their jobs. They created an us versus them mentality, where the customers were the enemy and they were the ones being put upon. What made it worse was that they were smart enough to change their behavior when managers were around. They had learned to spot when someone in authority was watching, and they would suddenly become model employees. This made it almost impossible for David to see what was really happening during his visits. The impact on the business was devastating, though David was only beginning to understand how bad it had gotten. Regular customers were choosing to shop elsewhere. New customers were having such bad experiences that they never came back. The store's reputation in the community was suffering, and word was spreading that this was not a place where people wanted to spend their money. David knew he had to do something drastic. The traditional approaches weren't working. The problems were getting worse, not better. He needed to find out what was really happening in his store when he wasn't there, and he needed to see it with his own eyes. That's when he came up with a plan that would change everything. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when David opened his laptop to check the overnight reviews. What he saw made his heart sink. A 1-star review with the title, "Worst Customer Service Ever," had been posted just hours before. The customer described being treated like garbage by staff who acted like helping people was beneath them. But it wasn't just one review. As David scrolled through the comments, he found story after story of customers feeling unwelcome, ignored, and disrespected. One person wrote about driving 30 minutes to the store only to leave empty-handed because no one would help them. Another described feeling embarrassed when staff members seemed to be laughing about their questions. The reviews painted a picture that David barely recognized. This wasn't the business he had worked so hard to build. This wasn't the culture he wanted to create. Somewhere along the way, his downtown store had become a place where customers felt like enemies instead of valued guests. David sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. He had tried everything he could think of through normal channels. He had sent managers to observe the store, but they always reported that things seemed fine. He had implemented new policies and procedures, but nothing seemed to change. The gap between what he was hearing from customers and what his managers were telling him was huge. That's when the idea hit him. What if the problem wasn't that his managers weren't looking hard enough? What if the problem was that the staff knew when they were being watched? Maybe the employees were putting on an act whenever someone in authority was around, then going back to their real behavior as soon as the coast was clear. The more David thought about it, the more it made sense. He remembered his own early days, working retail, how everyone would suddenly become more professional when the boss walked in. But back then, it was just about looking busy. This seemed like something much worse, a complete transformation of behavior depending on who was watching. David decided he needed to see his store through the eyes of a regular customer. Not as the owner making an official visit, but as someone who just walked in off the street looking to buy something. He needed to experience what his customers were experiencing without anyone knowing who he was. The plan started forming in his mind. He would go undercover in his own store. It sounded almost ridiculous when he thought about it, but what other choice did he have? Traditional management wasn't working. The problems were getting worse, not better. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. But how could he disguise himself in a store where he was the owner? David had visited the downtown location many times over the years. Surely the staff would recognize him the moment he walked in. He needed to find a way to blend in completely, to become just another face in the crowd. David started planning his disguise carefully. First, he would need to change his appearance significantly. He usually dressed professionally for store visits. Nice shirts, dress pants, the kind of clothes that announced he was someone important. For this mission, he would need to look like any other customer on a weekend shopping trip. He went through his closet and found clothes he rarely wore, an old baseball cap, a plain t-shirt, and jeans that had seen better days. He found an old pair of glasses he had worn years ago and decided they would help change his look. The goal was to become invisible, just another middle-aged guy looking to buy some electronics. Next, David had to think about timing. He couldn't just show up during a random weekday when the store was quiet. He needed to see how the staff behaved when they were busy, when there were lots of customers around. Weekend afternoons were usually the busiest times, when the staff would be most likely to show their true colors under pressure. David also realized he needed to prepare himself mentally for what he might discover. The reviews had been bad, but seeing problems firsthand would be different. He had to be ready to watch his employees treat customers poorly without immediately stepping in to stop it. He needed to gather evidence and understand the full scope of the problem before taking action. The hardest part was accepting that this was necessary at all. David had always prided himself on having a good relationship with his employees. He tried to be a fair boss who treated people well and created good working conditions. The idea that some of his staff might be completely different people when he wasn't around was difficult to accept, but the evidence was overwhelming. Customer after customer was telling the same story about rude, unhelpful staff. The ratings were dropping month after month. People were choosing to shop elsewhere and telling their friends to do the same. Something was seriously wrong, and traditional management approaches weren't fixing it. David picked a Saturday afternoon for his undercover mission. Saturdays were always busy at the downtown store, with lots of foot traffic and customers browsing for weekend projects or gifts. It would be the perfect time to see how his staff handled real pressure with real customers. He spent the week before his planned visit studying the store layout and employee schedules. He wanted to know who would be working and where they would be stationed. He reviewed the customer complaints again, looking for patterns and specific behaviors to watch for. The night before his undercover visit, David laid out his disguise and went over his plan one more time. He would enter the store, like any other customer, browse around, ask questions, and observe how the staff interacted with him and other customers. He would take mental notes of everything he saw and heard. As he prepared for bed, David felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Tomorrow, he would finally discover what was really happening in his store. He just hoped he was prepared for what he might find. Saturday afternoon arrived, and David put on his disguise with shaking hands. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The old baseball cap covered most of his hair, the glasses changed the shape of his face, and the casual clothes made him look like any other weekend shopper. He took a deep breath and headed to his own store, feeling like he was about to enter enemy territory. The downtown store was busy when David walked in, exactly as he had hoped. Families were browsing the aisles, teenagers were checking out the latest phones, and older customers were looking at tablets and computers. It was the kind of scene that should have made any business owner proud. But David was here for a different reason. He grabbed a shopping basket and started walking around, trying to blend in with the other customers. At first, everything seemed normal. People were shopping, staff members were visible throughout the store, and the atmosphere seemed fine. For a moment, David wondered if maybe the online reviews had been exaggerated. That feeling didn't last long. David's first real interaction came when he approached Lisa near the phone accessories section. An elderly woman was standing there looking confused, holding a phone charger package and turning it over in her hands. She clearly needed help but seemed hesitant to ask for it. "Excuse me," the woman finally said to Lisa. "I'm not sure if this charger will work with my phone. Could you help me check?" David watched as Lisa's entire body language changed. She had been chatting casually with another employee, but now her face showed clear annoyance. She let out a long sigh that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What kind of phone do you have?" Lisa asked in a tone that suggested this was the most ridiculous question she had ever heard. The elderly woman pulled out an older smartphone and showed it to Lisa. "I'm not very good with these things," she said apologetically. "My grandson got this for me, but I don't really understand all the different types of chargers." Instead of being patient or helpful, Lisa barely glanced at the phone. "That's a micro USB, she said quickly, then pointed vaguely toward a wall display. "Those are over there somewhere. You'll have to look for it yourself." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman looked embarrassed and confused, but Lisa had already turned back to her conversation with the other employee. The customer stood there for a moment, clearly hoping for more help, but Lisa completely ignored her. The elderly woman eventually walked away, still holding the wrong charger and looking lost. David wanted to help her himself, but he needed to stay in character. Watching a customer leave confused and empty-handed because his employee couldn't be bothered to do her job properly made his blood boil. But it got worse. David decided to test the staff himself by approaching Tony in the laptop section. Tony was leaning against a counter, scrolling through his phone with earbuds in one ear. Several customers were browsing nearby, but he seemed completely uninterested in helping anyone. "Excuse me," David said. "I'm looking for a laptop for my daughter who's starting college. Could you help me understand the differences between these models?" Tony barely looked up from his phone. He pulled out one earbud and stared at David like he'd been interrupted during something important. "What's your budget?" he asked flatly. "Around $800, David replied, playing his role as a concerned parent. Without moving from his spot or showing David any of the actual computers, Tony pointed toward a row of laptops. "Those are all in your price range. The specs are on the price tags. You can read them yourself." David was shocked. "Well, I'm not really sure what specifications I should be looking for. What would you recommend for a college student?" Tony shrugged. "I don't know what she's studying. Just pick one with decent RAM and storage. They're all pretty much the same anyway." This was completely wrong information, and David knew it. The laptops on display had very different capabilities, and choosing the wrong one could mean wasting hundreds of dollars or not having enough power for what was needed. Tony was basically telling a customer to guess on an important purchase rather than doing his job. But the worst was yet to come. David moved toward the customer service desk where Rachel was dealing with returns and exchanges. A middle-aged man was standing there with a tablet box, looking frustrated but trying to stay polite. "I bought this tablet for my wife last week," the customer was explaining. "But it keeps shutting down randomly. We tried everything the manual suggested, but it's clearly defective. I'd like to exchange it for one that works properly." Rachel looked at the receipt and the tablet with obvious suspicion. "Did you drop it?" she asked accusingly. "No, we were very careful with it," the man replied. "It just started having problems after the second day. The screen goes black randomly and sometimes it won't turn back on for hours." Instead of being understanding about a clearly defective product, Rachel began questioning every detail of the story. "Are you sure you didn't download something that caused problems? A lot of people mess up their devices and then try to return them as defective." The customer's face reddened with embarrassment and frustration. Other people in line were starting to stare. "I'm telling you, we barely used it. My wife only tried to read some books on it. There's obviously something wrong with the hardware." Rachel made a big show of examining the tablet, acting like she was looking for evidence that the customer was lying. She turned it on and off several times, making comments about how it seemed to be working fine for her. "I can process the return," she finally said, "but I'll have to charge you a restocking fee since there's no obvious defect. And next time, maybe read the manual more carefully before assuming something is broken." David watched in horror as the customer paid a fee for returning a clearly defective product, all while being treated like he was trying to cheat the store. The man left looking angry and embarrassed, probably planning to never shop there again and to tell everyone he knew about the experience. Throughout his time in the store, David observed the three employees when they thought no customers were listening. During a quiet moment, he heard them talking and laughing about the customers they had just dealt with. Lisa was imitating the elderly woman's voice, making fun of how she didn't understand technology. Tony was joking about how people expected him to be their personal shopping assistant. Rachel was complaining about customers who obviously damaged their products and then tried to return them. They were treating the people who paid their salaries like entertainment, like obstacles to get through rather than human beings deserving respect and help. David realized that the online reviews hadn't been exaggerated at all. If anything, they had been too kind. After 3 hours of watching his employees treat customer after customer with disrespect, indifference, and outright rudeness, David had seen enough. The culture in his store wasn't just bad, it was toxic, and it was time to do something about it. David had seen enough. 3 hours of watching his employees treat customers like dirt had pushed him past his breaking point. His hands were shaking with anger, but he knew he needed to stay calm and handle this the right way. He had the evidence he needed, and now it was time to act. He waited for the right moment. The three problem employees, Lisa, Tony, and Rachel, were gathered near the customer service desk during a brief lull in foot traffic. They were laughing about something, probably another customer they had just mistreated. A few other customers were browsing nearby, and David realized this was actually perfect. He wanted witnesses to what was about to happen. David walked slowly toward the group, his heart pounding. He reached up and removed his baseball cap, running his fingers through his hair. Then he took off the old glasses he had been wearing as part of his disguise. He was still wearing the casual clothes, but his face was now clearly visible. Lisa was the first to notice him approaching. She was in the middle of saying something to Tony when she glanced over and froze. The smile disappeared from her face, instantly replaced by a look of confusion, then growing horror as recognition set in. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for the others to hear. Tony looked up from his phone to see what Lisa was staring at. When he saw David, his face went completely white. The phone slipped from his hands and clattered onto the counter. Rachel was facing the other direction, still talking, unaware of what was happening. "I swear these customers get dumber every day," she was saying with a laugh. "That guy with the tablet was probably the worst yet, acting like we're supposed to believe his sob story about—" "Rachel," Lisa interrupted, her voice barely audible. "What?" Rachel turned around, annoyed at being interrupted. When she saw David standing there, the words died in her throat. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The three employees stood there in complete silence, staring at their boss. Other customers in the area began to notice the tension and stopped what they were doing to watch. The entire front section of the store seemed to hold its breath. David looked at each of them slowly, letting the moment sink in. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "I've been here for 3 hours," he said quietly. 3 hours, watching and listening to everything that goes on in this store when you think nobody important is around. Lisa tried to speak first. "Mr. David, we didn't know. We weren't expecting—" David held up his hand to stop her. "I know you weren't expecting me. That was the point. I came here as a regular customer because I needed to see what my customers see every single day." Tony was shifting nervously, from foot to foot, his face still pale. "Sir, if this is about earlier, I was just having a busy day and—" "A busy day?" David's voice remained controlled, but there was steel in it now. "You mean when you told a concerned father to just guess which laptop to buy for his daughter's college education, when you couldn't be bothered to put down your phone long enough to actually help a customer?" Tony had no answer for that. He stared at the floor, probably wishing he could disappear. David turned to Lisa. "And you. I watched you dismiss an elderly woman who just needed help finding the right phone charger. She was polite, she was patient, and she left your store confused and empty-handed because you couldn't spare 30 seconds to actually assist her." Lisa's face was bright red now. She could have figured it out herself. "The chargers are clearly marked." "Are they?" David asked. "Because that woman was holding the wrong charger when she left. She's probably at home right now, frustrated and confused, thinking she's too old to understand technology, all because my assistant manager was too important to do her job." Several customers were openly watching now, and David could see some of them nodding in agreement. They had probably experienced similar treatment themselves. Finally, David turned to Rachel. "And you," he said, his voice getting harder. "I watched you humiliate a customer over a clearly defective tablet. You made him pay a restocking fee for returning a broken product, and you treated him like a criminal the entire time." Rachel tried to defend herself. "Company policy says we have to check for damage before processing returns. I was just doing my job." "Your job," David repeated slowly, "is to take care of customers, not to assume they're lying to you. That man had a defective product, and instead of making it right, you made him feel like garbage and charged him money for the privilege." The confrontation was drawing more attention now. Other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch. Customers throughout the store were turning to see what was happening. Some were taking out their phones, probably recording the scene. David raised his voice slightly so everyone could hear. "But the worst part wasn't what I saw you do to individual customers. The worst part was listening to you mock those same customers afterward, making fun of their voices, laughing about their problems, treating the people who pay all of our salaries like they're your personal entertainment. The three employees exchanged glances, realizing just how much David had overheard. There was no denying it now, no way to explain away what he had witnessed. "I heard you imitating that elderly woman's voice," David continued, looking directly at Lisa. "I heard you complaining about customers expecting actual service," he said to Tony. "And I heard you calling customers liars and cheaters," he finished, staring at Rachel. A murmur went through the crowd of watching customers. Some looked angry, probably remembering their own bad experiences. Others seemed satisfied that someone was finally addressing the problems they had encountered. David took a deep breath and looked around the store. His employees, his customers, everyone was watching him. This was a moment that would define not just what happened to these three people, but what kind of business he was going to run going forward. "This ends today," he said firmly. "The disrespect, the laziness, the treating customers like enemies. All of it ends right now." The three employees stood there, waiting to hear their fate, knowing that their attitudes and actions had finally caught up with them. The reckoning they had never expected was happening right in front of everyone, and there was nowhere left to hide. The silence in the store was thick and heavy. Everyone was waiting to see what David would do next. The three employees stood frozen, knowing their careers hung in the balance. Customers continued to gather, some whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. David looked at Tony first. The young man was still staring at the floor, his phone forgotten on the counter where he had dropped it. "Tony," David said, his voice firm but not angry. "You're done here. Clean out your locker and turn in your name tag. You can pick up your final paycheck on Tuesday." Tony's head snapped up. "But sir, I'm sorry. I can really change. I need this job for college." David shook his head. "You had every opportunity to do your job properly. Instead, you chose to treat customers like interruptions and give them wrong information rather than actually help them. I can't have someone representing my business who doesn't care about the people we serve." Tony opened his mouth to argue, but David's expression made it clear the decision was final. With shoulders slumped, Tony walked toward the back of the store to collect his things. Several customers watched him go, and David could hear quiet conversations about how he deserved what he got. Next, David turned to Rachel. She was standing straighter now, trying to look defiant, but David could see the fear in her eyes. "Rachel, you've been with us for 2 years. I thought you understood what customer service meant, but clearly I was wrong. Making customers feel like criminals for returning defective products isn't just bad business, it's wrong." "I was protecting the store from fraud," Rachel protested. "You always said we needed to be careful about returns." "Being careful doesn't mean being cruel," David replied. "That customer today had a legitimate problem, and instead of solving it, you made him pay extra and feel terrible about it. How many other customers have you treated that way? How many people have left here feeling angry and embarrassed because of your attitude?" Rachel didn't have an answer. The truth was written all over her face. "You're terminated as well," David continued, effective immediately. "Please gather your personal items and leave." Rachel's defiant expression crumbled. "This isn't fair. I was just doing what I thought was right." "What's not fair," David said, "is how you treated the customers who trusted us with their business. Please leave quietly." Rachel stormed toward the back of the store, muttering under her breath. Some customers actually started clapping as she walked away, which told David everything he needed to know about how they felt about her service. Finally, David faced Lisa. She had been his assistant manager, someone he had trusted to help run the store. Her betrayal felt the most personal. "Lisa," he began, "you've been here the longest. You worked your way up from sales associate to assistant manager. I promoted you because I thought you understood what this business was about." Lisa's eyes were filling with tears. "I do understand. I've always worked hard for you." "Working hard isn't enough if you're working against our customers instead of for them," David replied. "You set the tone for this entire store. The other employees looked up to you, and what did you teach them? That customers are annoying? That helping people is beneath you?" "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," Lisa whispered. "But it did get this bad," David said. "And as the assistant manager, That was your responsibility to prevent. Instead, you became part of the problem. You can't lead a team when you don't respect the people we're here to serve. Lisa was openly crying now. Please, Mr. David. I know I messed up, but I can change. I'll do better. I promise. David felt a moment of sympathy for her, but he knew what had to be done. I'm sorry, Lisa, but the damage is too deep. You're no longer employed here. Please collect your things and turn in your keys. Lisa broke down completely, but she didn't argue anymore. She knew she had brought this on herself. As the three former employees gathered their belongings, David turned to address the customers and remaining staff who were still watching. The store was unusually quiet, with everyone hanging on his words. I want to apologize, David said, his voice carrying throughout the store. To every customer who has had a bad experience here, who felt unwelcome or disrespected, I'm truly sorry. This is not the business I built, and it's not what you deserve. Several customers nodded, and one older woman, not the same one from earlier, but someone who had clearly had her own experiences, called out, It's about time someone did something. David continued, Starting tomorrow, we're going to rebuild the culture of this store. Every employee will go through new customer service training. We're implementing a customer satisfaction program where your feedback directly impacts how we operate. And I'll be spending more time here personally to make sure these changes stick. He turned to his remaining employees. For those of you staying, understand that this is a fresh start, but it's also your only chance. The way we treat customers isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do. If you can't embrace that, then this isn't the right job for you. The remaining staff members nodded seriously. Some looked relieved that the toxic atmosphere was finally being addressed. Over the following weeks, David completely transformed the store. He hired new employees who genuinely cared about helping customers. He implemented regular training sessions and customer feedback systems. Most importantly, he made sure to visit the store regularly, not as an inspector looking for problems, but as a leader making sure his team had what they needed to succeed. The changes were dramatic and immediate. Customer complaints dropped to almost zero. Online reviews started improving within days, with people commenting on how much better the service had become. Sales began to increase as word spread that the store was actually a pleasant place to shop again. David learned valuable lessons from the experience. He realized that building a business wasn't just about having good policies on paper. It was about making sure those values were lived out every single day, especially when he wasn't watching. He also learned that toxic employees don't just hurt individual customers, they poison the entire workplace culture. 3 months later, the downtown store had become his best-performing location again. The new team worked together to help customers, took pride in their service, and created the kind of atmosphere that made people want to come back and shop again. David's undercover mission had been one of the most difficult things he had ever done as a business owner, but it saved his company. By having the courage to see the truth and act on it, he transformed not just one store, but his entire approach to leadership. The story became legendary among his employees across all locations. Everyone knew that their boss cared enough about customers to go undercover in his own store, and that knowledge kept everyone focused on providing the kind of service that would make any secret shopper proud.